Hi there, Andreas here with ExpressPad's Finger Drumming, and in this video I'd like to show you how you can create synth lines on your Novation Circuit. So we'll cover bass lines and pad or lead sounds on the second synth. And what I want to show you here in detail are how you can record something in real time, how to use the sequencing mode, how to use sidechaining, how to change the scales and root notes, how to use the extended note view, the functions of the Octave button using the gate function, pattern length and note nudge. So in the last video we have discussed how you can create a drum groove, and we can now use this one as a baseline or as a foundation for our synth lines. And when you go to synth 1, for example, and you are in note mode, you will notice that this looks different from the drum view. And the difference here is that on the top you have the different scales that are at your disposal and which are preset but which can be changed. So when you go through these, you see there are two scales, or it's one scale but in 2 octaves. And yeah, down here you can see the sequencing pad rows, which are functionally identical to what you see here in the upper or lower pad row section. Now, when you create a bass line, for example, then I suggest you use synth 1, because synth 1 and synth 2 have some kind of preset. That means that when you open a new session, then on synth 1 by default a monophonic bass patch is loaded, and on synth 2 a polyphonic patch is loaded. And that means that on synth 1 you can only play one note at a time, and on synth 2 you can play multiple notes at a time. Also, when we speak about polyphony here, Circuit can play up to 6 different notes per step. Yeah, so that's your polyphony limit on the higher end. And while when you are now on synth 1 and you want to create a bass pattern, then I suggest that you just let the drum groove run in cycle and then yeah, just experiment. Okay, I think I will take this one here, and then I hit record. And also here you might have noticed that I wasn't really accurate in my playing, but when I just play back, you notice that everything is in perfect sync, and that means that the device automatically syncs or hard quantizes everything that I enter here when I play it. Also, let's have a look at the velocity mode. I was in fixed velocity here, but I think that's okay for the moment. But here again you can choose to not apply fixed velocity. But just to show you again, there's a default value that a velocity value that you enter notes with when you use the sequencing area down here. Okay, so let's have a look how this now works. First of all, when you press one of these pads which you just entered or recorded, you see on the top which notes you have entered. So everything turns red, which is in focus. And then you can start editing it. Either you press this pad again and nothing happens anymore, or you just choose another pad there and there's your new note. So let's leave it there as is, and let's have a look what else you can see on this view here. What might be helpful from time to time is to use the extended note view, which you can access via pressing Shift and Note. And that means that your 2 octaves then turn into 4 octaves, and then you can play some more sophisticated patterns and which range above certain octaves. Also, when you want to work with different scales, you can press the Scales button, and there you see down here in these 2 rows there are 16 different scales that you can choose from. So this one is harmonic minor, I think here's major, and there are a couple of other scales as well, like whole tone or chromatic and blues scale and so on. But if you want to, for example, use the chromatic scale, you need to choose this one. And then you also see all of the pads up here light up. And that means that here you can choose the root node at which your node view later on will start on. So when I press this one now, go back to scales and press this one, it's a different node, right? And that's, you can change that here. And when, for example, I go to the natural minor scale again, those are the different nodes, root nodes that I can start my scale from. Okay, so that said about nodes, scales, and velocity, we should also discuss gate. So gate is actually node length, and that means when you enter this view, then you can see how long your nodes are. And I will just, for the bass, keep them very short. And you can, and here also it means if you have different nodes played on one step, so that's a step, and you know, you could, for example, instead of just one node, you could add 3. In case of a monophonic bass, it doesn't make any sense, but for polyphonic sounds, it makes sense. And then you need to know that everything that you change here in gate mode for that step will affect all your nodes on that particular step. Now let's play that. And what you can then do is shift that pattern around, and you do this via the nudge mode. So when you play this, you can either shift it to the front, so one step by step, one to the right, or you do this the other way around with this other button here. And finally, we have this length button, and the length button determines the length of the pattern. And this is again different from the drum section, because on drums you are always bound to 16 steps per pattern, but for the synth modes you can choose any number of steps per pattern between 1 and 16. So when going back to length, you could, for example, change this sequence from 16 to just 8 steps. Then you see that the sequence area down here is unlit except the nodes where you have placed steps. And when you press play, you see a time marker running just through the first row of pads from step 1 to 8. But you see the one below is just not playing. When you turn that back, you see your notes that you had there, they are still there. And if you want to use this creatively, you could, for example, use odd numbers of steps. For example, in this case, I will just take 7, and let's have a listen here. I don't know if this is musically very helpful, but you just to know what you can do with it. So this is another capability of the device. Next, on Synth 2, I want to show you how you can use the sidechain. And before I do this, I will just go back to 1, so Synth 1, and see what I played there. So okay, this was my pattern. And when I go to Synth 2, I will just place a chord above this. And here I will show you a different way. I will just touch and hold this pad and place a chord here, and I will just make it sustain over the whole pattern. And when I go to gate, I see how long this note is that I just placed here. So I will use 16 steps so it sustains completely. And then I will use the sidechain. And if you don't know what sidechain is, sidechaining means that you have one signal, which is usually the bass drum, which you want to cut through the mix, and therefore everything else in the mix on that place should be a bit lower in volume or significantly lower in volume. And the way this was solved on the Novation Circuit is that they provide you with 7 different sidechaining presets, so you don't need to use the knobs on the top in order to change the settings. You just have these 7 presets which have a different effect on your sound. It goes from very subtle to quite extreme, and I will just show you how this sounds then. Okay, and what you also will notice is that the synth sound here is not really sustaining long enough for this effect to be very prominent, and that's why we will just choose another synth patch here. So we go to Shift, Synth 2, and then you can choose from these 32 patches, or when you go to the next preset or patch page, you have another 32 patches to choose from. And here it's a bit different from the drums area, because in drums it's pretty well organized, because you had the drums, the bass drums on the top, snare drums on the lower 2 pad rows. But with synths, it's a very mixed picture, so you really need to try and error your patches. Yeah, this one here sounds okay for just showing this effect of sidechain. So let's go ahead here. Yeah, and this is the way you can apply sidechain. You could do this as well for the bass, but I won't do it here because I put the bass on the odd times. So my bass notes are actually always, exchanging with the bass drum. And but also here I just want to show you how you can change the bass drum patch. So you go to Shift, Synth 1, choose another bass patch. So I will just leave it there, and I will show you how you can change the bass sounds with the macro knobs on the top. So also here it's a bit different from the drum sounds, where each and every knob had its specific function. With the synth knobs it's a bit different. So the first 2 knobs are related to oscillators. The second 2 are generally related to envelopes. Here you can change modulation and filtering and effects on the last 4. But this is not common, so it's not the same on each and every patch. So you really need to go into patches and try to see what these different macro knobs come up with. So you just play and then turn the knobs. Okay, this sounds about right for the bass. And finally, I want to show you how you can use the Octave buttons creatively. So when you play something, and we are on the bass synth right now, you can press Shift and use the Octave buttons to pitch your bass line up and down. And this is also something that you can do while you are recording something. These 2 rows, when you play something, they show the notes that are playing, but when you're recording something, you could also change it manually here. And yeah, this way you can just narrow your focus that you're working on.